TRPA Governing Board, if you could take your seats, please. Madam Chair is feeling under the weather, so I'm going to chair today. It is Wednesday, December 18th, 2024. It is 11:29, so let's call this meeting of the TRPA Governing Board to order. The first item on the agenda is roll call. Maria, can you please call the roll?
Ms. Alding? Here. Mr. DeCara?
Here.
Mr. Bass? Here. Ms. Conrad Seda?
Here.
Ms. Faustinos?
Here.
Ms. Gustafson?
Here.
Ms. Hayes? Ms. Hayes, we can see you're online. And unmute, circle back. Ms. Hill? Mr. Henigman?
Here.
Mr. Keykefer?
Here.
Ms. Lane?
Here.
Ms. Loomer? Mr. Rice?
Here.
Mr. Settlemeyer?
Here.
Ms. Williamson?
Here.
And Ms. Hayes? Madam
Here.
Chair. Thank you. Vice Chair, we have a quorum.
Thank you. Thank you. And I think Mr. Jakara is here for Secretary Aguilar, just for clarification for the record. All right, let's go over the remote and in-person meeting rules for the day. For the members of the public who are joining us remotely, the meeting is at trpa.gov under the calendar header. There you will find a link to the public webinar hosted on Zoom. To address board members directly with your comments, raise your hand in Zoom by clicking raise hand or by dialing *9 if you're joining us telephonically. You will have 3 minutes to address the board. To remote board members, if you wish to speak, please either raise your hand or just get my attention. I'd like to remind board members not to use the chat box to make any comments or have sidebar conversations, and to please everyone mute your mics. Next item is the Pledge of Allegiance. If we could all stand, please, and say the pledge. Okay, thank you all. Let's move on to approval of the agenda. Staff, are there any changes to the agenda?
Thank you, Madam Acting Chair. No changes. I will add for the benefit of the public and the board. Our goal is to proceed through the entirety of the agenda, then take a lunch break where we have a wonderful holiday lunch for the board and staff. And then the legal committee will convene after the lunch. So the plan is just power through to the end of the full board agenda.
Great, thank you so much. With that, we will deem the agenda approved as filed for the record. Let's move on then to agenda item 4, which is approval of minutes. We have a draft set of minutes from the November 20th, 2024 meeting on page 41. Does anyone wish to make a change? And if not, I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes as presented.
Oh, go ahead, Ashley. No, please.
I was just going to move us along, but I thought you have a comment.
No.
Okay, so moved.
Thank you. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any objections? Thank you. Motion passes. That will bring us to agenda item 5, the TRPA consent calendar. There are 2 items on consent. One was reviewed by the Transportation Committee and one was not reviewed by any committee. As a reminder to the public, after board discussion on this item, you may raise your hand in person or raise your hand electronically to be called on. Alexis, do we have a report out from Transportation? Okay.
Is on.
Or does anyone want to report out for Transportation?
So yeah, Transportation Committee, we met and went over essentially the funding for transit. And there was a great comparison that was given by staff between RTC and TTD and TART and kind of how all of that works, and really the comparisons as we're looking at moving into the JPA on the South Shore, and a discussion around what TTD will become. I will say this year is the first year where ridership is really taking a different approach on how the funding is split. And one of the concerns that I brought up is that so North Shore is being counted for their TART Connect ridership, as right now South Shore is not getting our ridership numbers. And I think that we really got to work through that. I think it's something that can definitely happen. But you know, if we should all be getting the same ridership numbers, we do have Lake Link now, and we have got great ridership. And so because that is now such a metric and how the funding is split, I think, you know, it's only equitable to also include the Lake Link ridership. So I think that's something that we'll work on moving forward.
Thanks, Cody.
Yep.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
May I, Julie Reagan here for the record, may I just add also, in addition to Vice Chair Bass's report, the committee did recommend approval of consent calendar item number 1, and then also the TMPO consent calendar item number 1. Those items were heard and they recommended approval for the board.
Thank you. Do any board members have questions or comments about consent calendar item number 1? Okay. Consent calendar item number 2 is APC membership appointment for the City of South Lake Tahoe lay member, Robert Ehrlich. Information on this item is on page 75 of your packet. Is there any board members have questions or comments on consent item 2? Okay, let's go on to public comment then. If you are a member of the public who wishes to comment on this item, either please come forward or raise your hand online. And do we have one hand raised? It looks potentially that way. I can't tell. Okay, sorry, I can't see on the screen. Can you guys see back there whose hand is up and help me
Steve
call him?
DeShera,
Thank you.
please go ahead and address the board.
Thank you, Maria. For the record, Steve DeShera, Madam Chair and members of the governing board. I wanted to provide some clarity as to Mr. Bass's pertinent question relative to why, excuse me, why the North Shore microtransit is reported and counted for purposes of funding and why the South Shore is not. It has to do with the fact that the North Shore reports their microtransit ridership through the National Transportation Safety or National Transportation Database. And on the South Shore, that's not the case. Mr. Bass is correct that it's an issue we need to address going forward, so the South Shore would get a full credit for its transit ridership, which should include the Lake Link microtransit service. I hope that's an opportunity to provide some clarity for the board. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Teixeira. Any other comments from the public?
Madam Vice Chair, there are no hands raised for further comment.
Thank you very much. With that, I am looking for a motion to approve the consent calendar.
So moved.
We have a motion. Any discussion? Okay, Maria, can you please call the roll?
Ms. Aldine,
Yes.
Mr. Bass,
Yes.
Mr. DeCara.
Aye.
Ms. Conrad Seda,
Yes.
Ms. Hill, Ms. Faustinos,
Yes.
Mr. Keycapper,
Yes.
Mr. Henigman,
Yes.
Mr. Rice,
Yes.
Ms. Lane,
Yes.
Mr. Settlemeyer,
Yes.
Ms. Loomer, Ms. Gustafson,
Yes.
Ms. Williamson.
Yes,
That motion passes.
thank you. Before we move on to the next item, we need a motion to adjourn as the TRPA and convene as the TMPO. Do I have a motion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. We are now convening as TMPO, and that brings us to agenda item 6, which is the TMPO consent calendar. There's one item on consent, which was reviewed by the Transportation Committee. As a reminder to the public, after board discussion on this item, you may raise your hand to share comments. Cody, do you want to report on this one as well, or does anyone want to report out on transportation on this one?
Sure. I think that it's really a lot of the same report in a sense. We did approve the item on the overall work program. There is definitely a list of the projects and what's moving forward on the work program. So that's about it.
Thank you. Any questions or comments from the board? Hearing none, let's go to public comment. Any member of the public wishing to comment on this item, please either come forward or raise your hand online. I don't see any. All right, then I am looking for a motion to approve the TMPA consent calendar.
So moved.
Any discussion? Maria, can you please call the roll for a vote?
Ms. Aldine,
Yes.
Mr. Bass,
Yes.
Mr. DeCara,
Aye.
Ms. Conrad Seda,
Yes.
Ms. Hill, Ms. Faustinos,
Yes.
Mr. Keycapper,
Yes.
Mr. Henigman,
Yes.
Mr. Rice,
Yes.
Ms. Lane,
Yes.
Mr. Settlemyer,
Yes.
Ms. Loomer, Ms. Gustafson,
Yes.
Ms. Williamson.
Yes,
Madam Vice Chair, that motion passes.
thank you. And before we move to the next item, we do need to adjourn as TMPO and reconvene as TRPA. Do I have a motion to adjourn and reconvene? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? All right, that motion passes. We are now on to agenda item 7, administrative matters. This is election of governing board chair and vice chair for the 2025 through 2026 term. As a reminder to the public, after board discussion on this item, we will hear public comment. Any board members have comments on this item?
Julie, were you going to present something, or otherwise I'm happy to make a nomination?
I was just going to tee up that we can do this in one motion for the chair and vice chair. We don't have to do two separate motions, but after that decision, then we will have a moment to thank the outgoing chair as well.
Well, I'd be happy to make a motion for Ms. Williamson to be chair and Mr. Honeyman to be vice chair for next year, next 2 years. Yes.
All right. We will take public comment on this item at this time. Any public comment on this item?
Forgot.
Okay, it was efficient.
Yeah.
All right, any other comments for the board? Otherwise, we have a motion on the floor.
I just moved to close nominations.
Thank you. And that passes us over to Maria for a roll call vote.
Ms. Aldine,
Yes.
Mr. Bass,
Yes.
Mr. DeCara, Ms. Conrad Seda,
Yes.
Ms. Hill, Ms. Faustinos,
Yes.
Mr. Keycapper,
Yes.
Mr. Henigman,
Yes.
Mr. Rice,
Yes.
Ms. Lane,
Yes.
Mr. Settlemyer,
Yes.
Ms. Loomer, Ms. Gustafson,
Yes.
Ms. Williamson.
Yes,
Madam Vice Chair, that motion passes.
thank you. And I do think now is a nice time to, I don't know even the words to say thank you to Cindy for all the hard work and effort and just public service you have
Oh,
given
back
us.
at you. You're
That's-
gonna get it now. so.
But thank you so very much. It is beyond appreciated.
Oh, thank
It's
you.
big
Well, it
shoes
was
to
truly
fill.
an honor, and it was an interesting extra time period that I received the benefit of with the transition in the Nevada appointees. So happy to do it. It was really an honor and a privilege to work with all of you and serve you in that capacity. And I'm looking forward to a little less active role and time commitments.
Well earned, Cindy, well earned. Did anyone else want to say anything at this time? Go ahead, Ashley.
Yeah, I just want to thank Cindy for just really keeping an even demeanor throughout all of these meetings and making sure that we get through all the items and really being respectful of everyone and making sure that every voice is heard. It's really great and very welcome and nice to see just such a wonderful career in public service here at a regional level. So thank you so much.
I also want to thank Supervisor Gustafson, a partner up in Placer County and myself down in El Dorado County. You're just a pleasure to work with, and we've all served on boards. There's good chairs and there's some that need little work, and you are excellent. So thank you for your service.
John?
I would like to tell Cindy that she is the best TRPA chair I've ever worked for as interim executive director.
I
Well
like
said.
the qualifiers.
Well, thank you so much, Cindy.
Thank you.
I'd like to invite Cindy to up at the podium. We have just a little something. Well, you can't see this. We'll pass it around, but this is a beautiful plaque of the article from the Sierra Sun, your hometown paper, Cindy, that recognized the Lake Tahoe Restoration Act passage. And pictured in the photograph are Congressman Kevin Kiley, Cindy, Jesse Patterson from the League to Save Lake Tahoe, Senator Catherine Cortez Masto, and myself. And we just really wanted to present this as a memento of your time on the board. And just from my perspective, a great deal of thanks, because John Hester alluded to it, but you did oversee really, I think, the longest tenure as chair, 2.5 years, just because of the way things worked out. And that was a leadership change, a national search for a new executive director. And I had the honor to get that position, and you've made my transition incredibly smooth. And you've been such a support to me in these really difficult years of transition and change. And Lake Tahoe thanks you for your service. So with that, I'll give that to you. Okay.
All right. Let's move on then to agenda item 8, public hearings. Amendments, this agenda item 8A is amendments to the City of South Lake Tahoe's Tourist Core Area Plan. The amendments propose changes to density standards in town centers, clarify use categories, improve residential design standards, clarify commercial floor area, bicycle parking, and vehicle parking requirements for commercial and residential uses. The amendments would increase consistency with recently amended TRPA regulations and state housing regulations. Information on this item can be found on page 87. As a reminder to the public, after staff presentation and board discussion on this item, we will hear public comment. I'd like to turn this over to Julie Reagan and Alyssa Bettinger, I believe.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Actually, we had a very good discussion at the Regional Planning Committee related to these matters. And so some of you have heard that already. So in the interest of time, I'll turn this right over to Alyssa. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Hi, everyone. I'm Alyssa Bettinger, and I'll be introducing the next 2 items. I first want to just commend the city on the great work that they've done in getting to this point. It's been about a 2-year process for these amendments. And it is no small amount of work. The changes that you'll see today are a comprehensive set of amendments that align with both city and regional plan goals and are responsive to the community input that the city has received. We'll start with the Tourist Core Area Plan. This is the first area plan that was adopted in the city back in 2013. It encompasses the area of the Heavenly Village down to Ski Run. And let's actually go to the next slide. Perfect, thank you. And I would like to just set a bit of context for some of the changes that you'll see today. The city is proposing a few changes to density. They originally proposed increasing residential density up to 65 units per acre in the town centers. And after a pretty robust discussion at the Regional Planning Committee meeting last month, the RPC did recommend this morning to approve the amendments without that density provision included, and that is TRPA staff's recommendation as well. So I just want to give you a little bit of context before I turn it over to the city. We do know that increased density is, would help with our transportation goals in the regional plan and is generally the direction that we want to see for our town centers. So we think that this should be revisited in the next phase of our Tahoe Living, Housing and Community Revitalization Initiative work. But ultimately it is not necessarily ready to be approved today. So with that, I will hand it over to John Hitchcock with the City of South Lake Tahoe to go over the proposed amendments.
Thank you, Alyssa. Good morning, Chair Williamson and members of the Governing Board. For the record, John Hitchcock. Next slide, please. As Alyssa mentioned, The item before you are amendments to tourist core area plan. City staff has come before this board a couple times to amend the area plan, generally to reflect changes in land use policy, either at the state level or at the regional level, and to create either flexibility in the plan or to improve the plan based on the fact that we've been implementing this plan for a few years now. These amendments are no different. The goals and intent of the amendments before you today are to implement housing element policies that are currently adopted by the city of South Lake Tahoe, implement and incentivize transportation and connectivity in our tourist core, increase consistent with state laws regarding housing and parking where applicable, increase consistency with TRPA code changes. That includes adopting the phase 2 amendments for deed restricted housing, explore ways to activate our town centers and our streetscapes, and then just general improvements and code corrections that we recognize in the years that we've been implementing projects in the tourist core area plan. Next slide, please. Now I'll talk specifically about some of the proposed changes. The city is proposing to adopt a minimum density standard. Currently today, we don't have one. The intent behind this is to incentivize smaller units to make units affordable by design. There are exemptions that would apply to mixed-use projects. Maybe there are mixed-use projects interested in adding additional dwelling units to their property. They're not required to meet this minimum density standard. From the city's perspective, any additional housing unit is a good thing. Alyssa did alluded to the proposed maximum density standard of 65 units. The reason that city was proposing 65 dwelling units is really to, for all housing types, including market units, is really to incentivize and support the missing middle, and also to support secondary units in our town center that in some cases do become short-term rentals. And from the city's perspective, if we are going to have short-term rentals, we do want them in our tourist core. But we do understand that's not on the, that's part of the motion today, but we look forward working with TRPA as part of the working group on hashing through the density standards for all housing types. As I mentioned, we are adopting the phase 2 housing amendments for deed restricted housing. So there would be no maximum density for deed restricted units, which are designated as affordable, moderate, or achievable in our town center. Next slide. Over the last couple of years, we did notice a trend, particularly in the tourist core of single family homes and duplexes and triplexes being converted into short-term rentals. In order to stem the loss of housing, we do now have a no net loss standard. If a duplex is converted into a single family unit, the applicant will be required to replace that unit in kind. And the unit would have to be rebuilt on site or within the area plan. It would have to be equivalent in size and bedroom count. Next slide, please. So we're consistent with state law and also the current land use pattern of reducing parking. We have proposed that we have a standard that would allow 25% reduction, and this is optional within half-mile transit stop for commercial uses. Commercial projects could also reduce further than 25%, but they will have to provide additional analysis and a parking analysis that shows that they could reduce the demand beyond that 25%. We're also proposing another standard that would allow, in some cases, commercial uses to increase their parking demand if they can justify that demand is required for their particular use, and that would require specific findings to be made by the applicant. We're also proposing reductions in multifamily parking ratios down to 1 parking space per unit, and then also allow additional 20% reduction when the property owner is responsible for parking management. This would be accomplished through a deed restriction to be placed on a parcel that would outline how the property is managed for parking purposes. And as you mentioned, for phase 2 housing amendments, there are no minimum parking standards for 100% deed restricted units. We did also take a look at our requirements for bicycle parking, which was originally tied to the number of parking spaces. From our perspective, that didn't seem to make sense. And we're proposing a change to the standards that ties the number of parking spaces to the type of use and intensity of use rather than the number of parking spaces. So if you have like a restaurant which has a higher intensity use, we would require higher parking, higher number of bicycle parking stalls. Next parking, please. I'm sorry, next slide. Lost my train of thought there. Apologize. Commercial area exemption. As a way to activate our streetscapes, city staff believes that providing outdoor dining, outdoor seating makes a lot of sense, and that creates that active streetscapes. And we're proposing to allow an expansion of commercial floor up to 300 square feet or 20 seats for legally existing commercial use in order to activate the streetscape. This is modeled on the existing standard that's currently on the TRPA, within the TRPA Code of Ordinance that allows up to, I believe, 500 square feet of commercial floor area for legally existing commercial uses. Next slide, please. Residential open space. Currently, the plan requires 100 square feet of residential open space per unit. A concern was raised that by potentially requiring that much open space per dwelling unit could impact the number of units that could be realized on a parcel due to coverage requirements and height requirements. And so the standard would allow, if it would result in reduction of a unit, then the property would be allowed to limit the open space to 10% of the maximum allowed coverage open space. And this issue was brought up at the Regional Plan Committee. That open space has to be usable space. It's not visual open space. It has to be usable for the residents of the property, and that include things like play structure, tot lots, barbecue, patios, and things of the like. Next slide, please. Signage for accessory uses. Staff is proposing that accessory uses such as restaurants and tourist accommodation uses be allowed to advertise. Currently, they are not allowed to. It wouldn't be an increase in the number of signage because the property will be still subject to the sign formula, which only allows a certain amount of square footage for signage to begin with. It would be up to the property owner to decide how they would want to allocate their signage. Next slide, please. Staff is proposing expansion of the tourist core area plan to incorporate 2 properties on Pioneer Trail. These are currently developed with tourist accommodation uses that were built in the 60s and 70s. They're located in a residential planner statement right now and are designated as legal non-conforming uses. Incorporating into the tourist area plan would make them legal conforming uses and would provide the property owners opportunities to redevelop some aging tourist accommodation facilities. And with that, I believe is the end of my presentation, and I can answer any questions. And I thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Did you have anything to add to that? Okay, great. Thank you very much. At this point, I will call in any board members for questions or comments. Mr. Honigman?
Yeah, I thought I'd give just a little background on why we asked to pull out the increases in density. We believe, I think most of us believe that increasing density in our core areas is something that we would like to see. But we were afraid that that it would undermine what we had just approved in phase 2, which is allowing incentives for affordable or achievable housing only. So by allowing market rate developers to have some of the same incentives, we would make it even more expensive to build housing for our workforce. And given that we only have a certain number of units left to give out in the basin and a much greater need for workforce housing than we could ever hope to fulfill, we thought that the provisions needed some more work or explanation to show how they work together instead of one supplanting the other that we had just passed. So that gives you a little background on that. Those have been removed. Otherwise, APC and the RPC twice through support the remainder of all the changes in Commitment City for the work that they've done on them.
Thank you for that. Any other questions or comments? Mr. Bass?
Yeah, so just to kind of follow up on somewhat why the city council, we did vote to bring it to 65 units. And really, we look at the missing middle that Mr. Hitchcock spoke to as a real need in our housing element as well. We do see a lot of people that would never be, able to qualify for affordable and achievable that are constantly unable to find housing in our community. So allowing a 65 unit market rate development in the tourist core really fits with kind of what we want to do. And I know there's always a question of, okay, are these going to become VHRs? And Measure T in the city does allow VHRs in the tourist core only. So yes, that somewhat is a concern. And at the same point, as Mr. Hitchcock said, that is where we want our overnight stays. That's where our motels are allowed. And it does fit within the use of the tourist core. But I think it does open up the larger conversation that we've had here. If we want that, market rate housing to not become VHRs, we may want to talk about a discussion at the TRPA level of, how many VHRs do we want in each one of these areas, and kind of have that discussion. So just wanted to give context to kind of why the city council did vote, but we're really happy to see this pass without that and have it brought back. So we worked on it more and we're able to move forward. So thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Lane, and then and Ms. Aldine Nest? Okay. Ms. Lane, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Williamson. I just want to commend the city. I think you've brought forth some very strong guidelines that other jurisdictions, I think, in the basin should follow and consider. It seems to me like with regards to the maximum number of units per acre, that discussion, that really needs to come back and be discussed, because it feels to me like everyone's just plucking numbers out of the sky. I mean, I don't know why TRPA landed on 25 when we always say as an agency that greater density is better. So how did we stop at 25, and how did the city come up with 65? And I mean, this whole thing just seems like it really needs to be worked out, but sooner than later. I love the way that TRPA did the affordable housing pieces, where we basically said, you don't have to provide parking if you can show that you have a model that works. And I think density might kind of be in that same arena, where we need to say not a hard no to an area plan because we're not sure of the number, but rather upon demonstration that it works. I kind of like that model that we started out with, and there could be some opportunity in there. Thank you.
Ms. Aldine?
When this item comes back for further discussion, I mean, achievable housing has no income cap. So I'm not sure why we're focused on market rate housing when there's a need for workforce housing at all levels, some of it deed restricted and some not deed restricted. But I think that from my perspective, I would have been a lot more comfortable with the density increase if there's some way of guaranteeing that these units, even though they're not deed restricted affordable, were going to be used for workers, police officers, firefighters, people who are working in this area who are tired of commuting from outside the basin. So when it does come back, I think there's an opportunity to perhaps re-examine increased density in light of what's already on the books with respect to achievable housing.
All right, at this time, I'm looking for any public comment on this item. If you wish to comment, either please raise your hand in Zoom or dial *9 or just come up to the podium. It looks like we have one in person coming up.
My name is Deepak Sharma, for record. This has been a long process, and there are so many competing agendas, and they don't seem to align. It's hard to get an agreement, but whatever it is, I'm glad, you're reaching a conclusion, not further, kicking the can. I think, your board needs to be commended on what you did to try to fit it in all in one day and move it forward. There needs to be something, to be said about it. Efficiency in government, today shows that you can actually do something and move it forward. So that's great. I'll add one more item, that's the outside of the jobs that are paid by state or federal, there is a private industry out here. Okay, your agenda of keeping Tahoe blue should not translate to keep Tahoe poor for those people who live here, work here, do business here. They need some opportunity. They don't need to be poor. There are two different things, environment and economy. You go too hard on environment when it is not needed. There are certain things you can do for economy. They don't hurt environment at all. So I hope that moving forward, you keep in economy in your mind when you make decisions. There is only one industry here, that is tourism. There is nothing else. We don't do logging here. We don't do mining here. We don't even have ranches here, nothing. There is only one industry, that is tourism. Please support it. And there is a private industry here. Those people also, they don't need to come down to living on charity dollars and all that. They want to work. It's a hardy town. These people want to work. Don't take the opportunity away from them. So again, I really praise what you did today. Shows that things can be done. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And seeing no other public comment in the room, can we go online, please?
Yes, Madam Vice Chair, we have one hand raised online. Doug Flaherty, please unmute to make your comment.
Yeah, Doug Flaherty, TahoeCleanAir.org. Forgive the blower behind me. Well, today's agenda's items 8A and B address separate area plans due to their geographical proximity. The environmental and public safety impacts must be analyzed in a cumulative manner. Both area plan amendments represent a project under CEQA. This is determined by the California Supreme Court ruling, Union of Medical Marijuana Patients versus the City of San Diego, since the project has the potential to cause direct and indirect physical changes in the environment. Since both area plan proposals represent a project, TRPA may not approve either project without first making a finding of net zero BMT. This is outlined in the October 22nd, 2024 California Attorney General letter to the TRPA. Project documentation fails to provide substantial evidence to support their mitigation claims, which therefore make the mitigation claims arbitrary and capricious. This includes the lack of evacuation timing and capacity modeling analysis to determine whether the projects will be exposing people or structures to a significant risk of injury or death involving wildland fires or possibly interfere with the existing emergency evacuation plan. Even though current data and the latest technology are available to do so, project documentation fails to include a comprehensive roadway by roadway wildfire evacuation time analysis before arriving at a finding of no significant effect or less than significant effect, and failed to address the California Attorney General's best practices for analyzing and mitigating wildfire impacts. Project documentation also fails to discuss wildfire ignition. Similarly, here, as in the recent Center for Biological Diversity versus the County of Lake, South Lake Tahoe and the TRPA have failed to properly analyze how the projects would affect evacuation routes during a wildfire. The court found that the project's approval should be set aside because it did not adequately consider the potential for increased congestion and delay on evacuation routes, which could pose significant risk during wildfire emergencies. No project should make it harder for people to evacuate during a wildfire. How can this board recommend approval of these area plan modifications, knowing that in the South Valley EIC, which states on page 130, the permanent effect of additional residents, employees, and structures within the Tahoe Valley plan area could significantly increase the amount and severity of emergency response required in the area, affecting emergency response and evacuation plans. Therefore, this impact is potentially significant. The gentleman from South Lake Tahoe will echo that they've addressed the Attorney General's guidelines. This is not the case. They've only addressed one, and the mitigation measures are arbitrary and capricious. Thank you.
Thank you. And it looks like we had another hand go up.
Yes, Madam Vice Chair, Dana Romerdahl, please unmute to make your comment.
Hello.
Hi, Dana, please make your comment.
We can hear you. Go ahead when you're ready.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry. For the record, my name's Dana Romerdahl. I'm here representing SMR Development and Novin Development Company. We would like to express our support for the TCAP amendments as a way to enable affordable housing across the entire spectrum of housing needs. I cede the rest of my time. Thank you.
Thank you. And is that it for online comments?
Yes, Madam Vice Chair, there are no other hands raised.
Thank you. Are there any other further questions from the board at this time? Okay, if not, it looks like we have two motions. I will entertain the first.
Sure, Madam Chair, I'll put forward a motion to approve the required findings, including a finding of no significant effect for adoption of proposed tourist core area plan and Pioneer Ski Run Plan area statement amendments as provided in exhibits 1 and 2 to attachment B, excluding the proposals to increase density to 65 units per acre inside the town center as shown in exhibit 3 to attachment B.
All right, we have a motion, and unless anyone has any further comments or questions, Maria, can you please call the roll?
Ms. Alding,
Yes.
Mr. Bass,
Yes.
Mr. DeCara,
Aye.
Ms. Conrad Seda,
Yes.
Ms. Hill, Ms. Faustinos,
Yes.
Mr. Keycapper,
Yes.
Mr. Henigman,
Yes.
Mr. Rice,
Yes.
Ms. Lane,
Yes.
Mr. Settlemeyer,
Yes.
Ms. Loomer, Ms. Gustafson,
Yes.
Ms. Williamson.
Yes,
Madam Chair, the motion passes.
thank you. And I will also look for the second motion.
Sure. Furthermore, a motion to approve ordinance 2024, amending ordinance 2020-02 as previously amended to amend the tourist core area plan and Pioneer Ski Run Plan area statement to include the additions and revisions as provided in exhibits 1 and 2 to attachment B, excluding the proposals to increase density to 65 units per acre inside the town center as shown in exhibit 3 to attachment B.
And Maria, can you please call the roll?
Mr. Bass,
Yes.
Ms. Alding,
Yes.
Ms. Conrad Seda,
Yes.
Mr. DeCara,
Aye.
Ms. Faustinos,
Yes.
Ms. Hill, Mr. Henigman,
Yes.
Mr. Keycapper,
Yes.
Ms. Lane,
Yes.
Mr. Rice,
Yes.
Ms. Loomer, Mr. Settlemeyer,
Yes.
Ms. Gustafson,
Yes.
Ms. Williamson.
Yes,
Madam Chair, the motion passes.
thank you. That brings us to agenda item 8B, which is amendments to the City of South Lake Tahoe's Tahoe Valley Area Plan. The amendments propose changes to density standards in town centers, clarify use categories, improve residential design standards, clarify commercial floor area, bicycle parking, and vehicle parking requirements for commercial and residential uses. The amendments would increase consistency with recently amended TRPA regulations and state housing regulations. Information on this item can be found on page 163. As a reminder to the public, after staff presentation, we will take public comment. Back to Alyssa.
Thank you. Again, Alyssa Bettinger for the record. This is the city's other adopted area plan. It was adopted back in 2015. It encompasses the area known as the Y in South Lake Tahoe. The area plan amendments are very similar in terms of policy changes to the tourist core area plan amendments that John just described. So Anna will give a pretty brief presentation focused on the boundary changes of this area plan. And with that, I will turn it over to her.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Anna Kashuba. I'm a senior planner for the City of South Lake Tahoe. This item consists of amendments to the Tahoe Valley Area Plan. As Alyssa mentioned, the majority of changes within these amendments are consistent with those Mr. Hitchcock previously discussed, so I will only be covering the items that are unique to the Tahoe Valley Area Plan. Next slide, please. So these changes primarily consist of changes to the plan area boundary. This first area that we have proposed to change is just east of Tahoe Keys Boulevard between James and Eloise. This area was part of the Tahoe Island Plan Area Statement Special Area 2. It was a special area as when the plan area statements were created, there was understanding that these parcels had more of a commercial nature than the rest of the plan area statement. Prior to the city's amendments, we did receive an application to amend this plan area statement, and our city council chose to include that request with this overall process. So the parcels you see highlighted on the map have been added to the neighborhood professional district, which is part of the town center. This will meet the amendment request. It will bring legal nonconforming uses and densities into compliance, as well as open up some residential incentives for these parcels. Next slide, please. This next area of addition consists of just 8 parcels being added to the Gateway District, also part of the town center overlay. The reasoning is very similar to the previous area in that this change would legalize non-conforming uses and densities and make residential incentives available to these parcels. Next slide, please. This slide shows a district that is proposed, which would be entirely new to the plan area. It's been added to the plan area, but not to the town center overlay. The purpose of adding these parcels is to encourage residential development, as the majority of these parcels are quite large. They're all about 1 acre in size and have high land capabilities. By adding these parcels, the city is also incorporating TRPA's Phase 2 amendments for areas outside of town centers. Next slide, please. The density for this new district would include our new minimum density of 12 units per acre, as well as a maximum density of 15 units per acre. The city did actually adopt a maximum of 25 units per acre for this district. However, with the understanding that that is currently not compatible with the TRPA Code of Ordinances, and that in last month's discussion at RPC, that discussion was limited to densities within the town center. We do have the understanding that the 25 would not be permissible and the maximum would land at 15 units per acre. Next slide, please. These are changes to the existing healthcare district, which is in the town center. No boundary changes here, just some changes to the permissible uses. In our outreach, we heard from a lot of property owners in this area that they were having trouble finding tenants for their spaces with the relocation of Barton, as the original permissible use list was really structured around Barton and those supporting medical services. So the uses you see on the screen here have been added to this district. Staff was careful in considering these uses to ensure there wouldn't be any noise conflicts or traffic conflicts with residential uses, as there are a number of residential uses within this district as well as a surrounding area. So the uses you see here have been limited to those that generally operate during normal office or daytime hours. Next slide, please. And at this time, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Questions or comments from the board? Mr. Bass?
Similar comments to my last comments. We as a city council did vote to approve this with 25 units. And again, I think that as we look at this area of town, especially the more density we can get, because this is really more of our local housing area of town is a great thing. And one thing about Measure T in this area plan is their vacation rentals are not allowed. So there's no worry of them becoming vacation rentals unless it happened to be commercially zoned. So just to put that out there as we consider it later on, and I know it will be considered, but happy to support and happy to see this go through.
Thank you. Ms. Lane?
Thank you, Chair Williamson. My question is, again, around the density. If TRPA in the next year or so goes back and takes a look at these density numbers and decides on something different, but the city has lowered their number in order to comply with the TRPA ordinance, if TRPA's rules change, is there a way that it could automatically affect a plan area statement like for the city? Like maybe instead of saying maximum 15, say, maximum whatever TRPA allows, so that if it changes, the change automatically gets implemented into the plan area statement. It's just a weird thought.
It's not that weird of a thought. We actually had proposed changing chapter 13, which sets the maxes. And that's what the regional planning committee said we want to look at more. but it'd be easy to, the city would have to do it, but it'd be easy to change it to 25 or the maximum allowed in chapter 13, table, whatever. John knows the table I'm talking about. So, but you could do that.
I think you bring up a really great point, because if we don't do that, we will have to come back to amend this area plan again with the new numbers. And so is that something that we could change right now? If we wanted to amend the language as we approve it?
I don't know. You all as a board could vote to do that. I don't know that the city council, we can't speak for the city council, but.
Ms. Reagan?
Thank you. Good discussion. Thank you, Julie Reagan here. We have had good discussions with the city about this. And I think the big lesson learned from this process, if you scale this way up and you think about when these area plan amendments started a couple years ago, in the meantime, this board just a year ago, this December, adopted the phase 2 amendments. And so we need more time to consider implications. So I would just ask for a little more time to work on that at this, with the city staff and develop, what is the most expeditious path forward? Because we don't want to have a conflict on the books between the city and TRPA, but we do need a little more time. So our solution today was bring the entirety of the area plans minus those 2 density provisions forward so we can get them going and get them implemented, because people have worked for a couple years in earnest. And then we could take a little more time at staff level to bring you back a recommendation.
Mr. Settlemeyer?
Thank you. This is more of a legal question probably for Graham. If we change the language and stated that it was a maximum, that it automatically changed that number, but whatever number was set would automatically change, versus if we do something now and set it, it can be grandfathered. Correct? So if we accidentally, or whatever reason in the future, lowered it, it would lower this one, where if we set it now, it guarantees it as a grandfather.
Yeah, I think if I follow Director Settlemeyer, I think that's correct. I mean, I would just second Julie's recommendation here on just to proceed with the workup of the materials that we have. Sometimes, just I think it can be difficult to do this on the fly, just as a practical matter. We do include or anticipate that these, that this proposal to increase density further will come through at our phase 3 housing. And so we do plan to reconsider this and possibly come back. And I agree that there's an additional process here, but I think I'd recommend just sticking with it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I just worry about unintended consequences.
I did want to also answer your previous question. The 25 came from a number that was gross density for transit to be viable. We're now looking at net density and what kind of transit, there's viability for bus rapid transit, light rail, et cetera. So I think in the Tahoe Living Working Group, we're going to be revisiting the numbers anyway. So hopefully that'll get it addressed.
Okay, let's go now to public comment. Members of the public in person wishing to make comment, please make your way to the podium. And seeing none, can we please turn to the online comments?
We have two hands raised to make public comment online. Okay. The first hand up is Steve Teixeira. Steve, please unmute to make your comment.
Thank you. And again, Steve Teixeira for the record, this time on behalf of Tahoe Chamber, just to highlight the great robust process that the city has gone through to develop these amendments, the area plans that are before you today. City does a great job of reaching out to residents, members of the business community, and potential investors, and really does a good job of considering everything through the process of public workshops, the Planning Commission, and the City Council. So there are some issues, as you've highlighted today, that can be continually worked on, but I think these items are ready for your action today. And again, commend the city for doing a really good job of listening to the community, all elements of the community, and trying to bring forward things that are responsive to the community to whom they are committed. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next hand up is Doug Flaherty. Doug, please unmute to make your comment.
Doug Flaherty, TahoeCleanAir.org. Forgive the repetition, but I feel that I need to go on the record. While today's agenda items 8A and B address separate area plans due to their geographical proximity, the environmental and public safety impacts must be analyzed in a cumulative manner. Both area plan amendments represent a project under CEQA. This is determined by the California Supreme Court ruling Union of Medical Marijuana Patients versus the City of San Diego. Since the project has potential to cause direct and indirect physical changes in the environment. Since both area plan proposals represent a project, TRPA may not approve either project without first making a finding of net zero VMT. This is explained in the October 22nd, 2024 California Attorney General letter to the TRPA. Project documentation fails to provide substantial evidence to support the mitigation claims, making the mitigation claims arbitrary and capricious. This includes lack of evacuation timing and capacity modeling analysis to determine whether the projects will be exposing people or structures to a significant risk of injury or death involving wildland fires or possibly interfere with the existing emergency evacuation plan. Even though current data and the latest technology are available to do so, project documentation fails to include a comprehensive roadway by roadway wildfire evacuation timing analysis before arriving at a finding of no significant effect or less than significant impact, and failed to address the California Attorney General's best practices for analyzing and mitigating wildfire impacts. Project documentation also fails to discuss wildfire ignitions. Similarly here, as in the recent rulings involving the Center for Biological Diversity versus County of Lake, South Lake Tahoe and the TRPA have failed to properly analyze how the project would affect evacuation routes during a wildfire. The court found that the project approval should be set aside because it did not adequately consider the potential for increased congestion and delay on evacuation routes, which would pose significant risks during wildfire emergencies. No project should make it harder for the people in the region to evacuate during a wildfire. How can this board recommend approval of these area plan modifications, knowing that the South Lake Tahoe Valley Area Plan IEC page 130 states the permanent effect of additional residents, employees, and structures within the Tahoe Valley Area Plan could significantly increase the amount and severity of emergency response required in the area, affecting emergency response and evacuation plans. Therefore, this impact is potentially significant. And just want to close by saying we all have our roles. My role is priority of public safety over development. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other hands raised at this time? No. Thank you. With that, if there are no other board member questions or comments, I will look for a motion. Oh, Ms. Lane, go ahead.
I have one question, Chair. The motion is, we're taking out the 65 density for town centers, but are we leaving in the 25 for outside of town centers? Is that coming out also? Okay. It's not clear in the motion. It wasn't to me.
The motion was amended at the Regional Plan Committee.
Oh, good.
meeting.
Okay.
So if I may,
Please.
Madam Chair, I move to approve the required findings, including a finding of no significant effect for adoption of proposed Tahoe Valley Area Plan amendments as provided in Exhibits 1 and 2 to Attachment B, excluding the proposals to increase density to 65 units per acre inside the town center and to increase density to 25 units per acre outside of the town center, as shown in Exhibit 3 to Attachment B.
And with that, Maria, can you please call the roll?
Ms. Alding,
Yes.
Mr. Bass,
Yes.
Mr. DeCara,
Aye.
Ms. Conrad Seda,
Yes.
Ms. Hill, Ms. Faustinos,
Yes.
Mr. Keycapper,
Yes.
Mr. Henigman,
Yes.
Mr. Rice,
Yes.
Ms. Lane,
Yes.
Mr. Settlemeyer,
Yes.
Ms. Loomer, Ms. Gustafson,
Yes.
Ms. Williamson.
Yes.
Okay, Madam Chair, the motion passes.
Thank you. And the second motion, please?
Madam Chair, I move to adopt ordinance 2024 amending ordinance 2021-01 as previously amended to amend the Tahoe Valley Area Plan to include the additions and revisions as provided in exhibits 1 and 2 to attachment B, excluding the proposals to increase density to 65 units per acre inside the town center and to increase density to 25 units per acre outside of the town center as shown in exhibit 3 to attachment B.
Thank you. And Maria, can you please call the roll?
Mr. Bass,
Yes.
Ms. Aldine,
Yes.
Ms. Conrad Seda,
Yes.
Mr. DeCara,
Aye.
Ms. Faustinos,
Yes.
Ms. Hill, Mr. Henigman,
Yes.
Mr. Keycapper,
Yes.
Ms. Lane,
Yes.
Mr. Rice,
Yes.
Ms. Loomer, Mr. Settlemeyer,
Yes.
Ms. Gustafson,
Yes.
and Ms. Williamson.
Yes.
Madam Chair, the motion passes.
Thank you. We are now on agenda item 9, planning matters. Agenda item 9A is the discussion and possible direction regarding the newly updated Tahoe Basin Community Wildfire Protection Plan. Information on this item can be found on page 231. As a reminder to the public, since this item is informational only, we'll hear any public comment on this topic at the final public interest comment period. Kat, take it away.
Thank you so much, Madam Vice Chair, soon to be Chair, as well as governing board members. As mentioned, my name is Kat McIntyre. I'm the Environmental Improvement Program Department Manager here at the TRPA, as well as the Forest Health Program Manager. And today you're going to be hearing a presentation regarding the updated Tahoe Basin Community Wildfire Protection Plan. One quick note before I set some context. This presentation was agendized as actionable as an action item, but staff actually have decided that there is no recommendation for a motion. There is no motion. So with that, it's really just an informational presentation and an opportunity for the board to learn about this update, all of the great information that's gone into it. And then independently, if you so choose, as representatives of your organizations, provide comments because we are in the public comment period. So with that, Tracy, will you go to the next slide, please? As I mentioned, I just want to set a little bit of context about where the CWPP nests within the Environmental Improvement Program. So the Environmental Improvement Program is a multi-sector collaborative partnership focused on restoration and increasing and attaining threshold or increasing pace and scale of threshold attainment across 4 focus areas. And one of those focus areas is forest health. And so you'll see on the right side of the screen, that's really kind of the hierarchy of the system. At the top, we've got the Tahoe Interagency Executive Steering Committee that's really guiding the Environmental Improvement Program. Then you have the multi-agency coordinating group. That's all of the fire chiefs and the land managers who are operating in the forest health and fire space. They're underneath Ty. And then at the bottom is the Tahoe Fire and Fuel Team. And Mike and Cheyenne are going to give you a little bit more background on that. And then on the left is really the guiding document. This is what guides everything we do at the Tahoe Fire and Fuels Team. And 2 of the main focuses for the Forest Action Plan are a WUI focus, so a focus on getting work done in the wild and urban interface, and then also technology and innovation, both things you will see in the presentation today. Next slide, please. Before I hand it over to our 2 presenters, which I realize I did not introduce, and I will do that after. I do want to just highlight TRPA's role in this system. So we are a signatory to the multi-jurisdictional fuel strategy. We have a code of ordinances and thresholds related to forest health that really dictate what can and cannot be done in the Tahoe Basin as it relates to forest resilience and wildfire. We are a leader and convener in the Environmental Improvement Program and in Tahoe Fire and Fuels Team. And as it relates to the Community Wildfire Protection Plan, TRPA sits on the steering committee, and that has been a collaborative document that has been led by the Tahoe RCD. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Mike Vollmer, who is the Executive Director of the Tahoe RCD, and Cheyenne Newfer, I got it, who is the Fire Adapted Communities Community Wildfire Protection Plan Coordinator. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Kat. So I'm Mike Vollmer, the Executive Director for the Tahoe Resource Conservation District. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Vice Chair, members of the board. I'm also a registered professional forester. I've been in the wildfire space in the Tahoe Basin since 2002, since the gondola fire. When I worked here at TRPA, I worked at TRPA for almost 15 years and held many different titles, but I also, I guess I was the first forest management program manager for the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency. I think the last time I was before this board was in 2017, so I'm really excited and delighted to be here before you today. I recognize a handful of you that are still on the board. Hi, Shelley. And full disclosure, 4 months ago, I stopped drinking coffee and I was decaffeinated, and this week was the week that I started to be recaffeinated. So if I go too fast, just hold your hands up and just tell me to slow down and pump the brakes a little bit. But I will say after 4 months this week, the magic has been real. All right, so I just want to start out with a few acknowledgements and thank yous. I want to thank the California Tahoe Conservancy, who is the funder of this project. This all manifested under Forrest Schaefer when he was with the CTC. We had long conversations about being able to integrate technologies, new emerging technologies, and how we analyze the landscape and how we prioritize project areas. And so CTC had funding to fund this project. So I want to thank them. There's also been a lot of partners that have played really big roles in this, because again, this is just a really big partnership. The Tahoe RCD has really been the facilitator that's been guiding the process, but all the input has been through the fire protection districts, CAL FIRE, NDF, the U.S. Forest Service, TRPA, CTC, and a number of other stakeholders as the TFFT goes. So that's it. Slide number 1, please. All right, so I'm just going to start out, just kind of give you some definitions, just some reminders of what these documents are, what they aren't. And so we'll start out with the Community Wildfire Protection Plans. So this started in 2003 with the Healthy Forest Restoration Act. And it was in that document, or in that legislation, it was where CWPPs were kind of created, and they were encouraged for communities to engage in this and produce CWPPs so that you could access the funding that was going to come out of the Healthy Forest Restoration Act. However, the Healthy Forest Restoration Act never produced any money, but all other funding sources basically that do fuel reduction, that do community wildfire protection planning, things like that, they all require CWPPs. And at this point, CWPPs typically need to be no older than 5 years. So they need to stay current. So that was part of the backstory of why the new technology and trying to get this thing as kind of web-based and a little bit more nimble so that we could update at a little bit better clip. Again, so CWPPs are intended to identify projects in the wildland-urban interface. They're great educational documents for the public, and as well as identifying areas that are priority areas for projects to mitigate wildfire for communities. Also, so in 2004, when I was here, I led the first CWPP in 2004. We had money through the Bureau of Reclamation, and we rallied all the fire protection districts, and we produced the first CWPPs in 2004, which was only a year after the legislation. And I believe that we were one of the first in the country to have a approved CWPP. And we did reap the benefits of that. We ended up getting a lot of funding initially to do a lot of projects. And then we updated in 2015. So our current CWPP is quite dated. It's 10 years old, which was the old limit of how old they were supposed to be, but we're about 5 years behind. We've still been able to use them to get funding, but we're excited about this one. So this will be the new 2025 CWPP. We're very excited about it. And just to give you a little bit of an idea, these were just easier numbers to pluck. I couldn't find numbers all the way back. So since 2010, we've treated over 64,000 acres, and the CWPP has allowed us to secure over $167 million in funding. Next slide, please. The CWPPs have general requirements, although each community is different and can guide the things that they want in a CWPP. And I'll share some of the things that we did that were a little bit different this time in a little later. What do I got? That's not my slide. And so it requires collaboration. So Cheyenne will share with you later what we did with the public outreach, stakeholder engagement. We had a big survey, things like that. So the collaboration, and then the interagency collaboration as well. And you'll see some of that. That's again, a little bit based on our TFFT, the Tahoe Fire and Fuels team. It prioritizes fuel reduction project areas. That's required. And I'll show you how we did that with some emerging technology and then a treatment of structural ignitability. We've already kind of hit that a little bit with this guide right here. We have a home hardening guide, which is has been not just, well, it's let's say Nevada extension, UC extension, CAL FIRE and Tahoe RCD helped to produce this document. It has been rebranded and reapplied throughout the country. So it's been a very successful document just for us, not just for us, but for others throughout the country. And then, yeah, next slide. All right, so collaboration. This slide, I think, is it going to move? Yeah. So anyway, so you all know this story. The 4 counties, 2 states, 6 fire protection districts, the Forest Service, TRPA, we got the NDF, CAL FIRE, blah, on and on. So all the logos that you see up here have been involved in this process, and they are also the entire group that has come together to form the Tahoe Fire and Fuels team, which was formed in 2008 to address these issues. And it's been probably, I mean, I'd have to say it's been one of the highlights of my career here in Tahoe is working with this group. It's been a very functional group, and we've done a lot of really great work for the basin. So next slide. All right, so I know this one's a little bit slow, a little bit small. I have a next slide that'll show you a little bit closer up, but just to define the wildland urban interface, we have about 130,000 acres that we define as wildland urban interface. That's about 63% of the land area in the basin. And that is split up into the community wildfire urban interface intermix, it's a mouthful, which is basically the urban core and the closest to where our infrastructure is. Then we have the defense zone, which is a 1/4 mile from the boundary of the community and goes out for a 1/4 mile. And then we have the threat zone that goes an additional 1.25 miles from the boundary of the outside edge of the defense zone. So there are 3 general zones for the WUI, and then the rest of the forest that's in green up here is considered general forest, which is not necessarily the focus of this document. So we are focused on the areas next to communities for protecting communities. And next slide, and I'll show you a little close up. So here you can see it a little bit better. You can see in that blue-gray, that's the urban core or the intermix. It should be noted that if I go to Reno, if you want to see trees, you typically go to the urban area because they planted the trees there. We planted houses in our trees. So the intermix here is really a wildland urban intermix. It's, it's connected to the forest. So then we go to the lighter yellow area, and that's the 1/4 mile. That's the defense zone, which is really the area that we're focused on as far as outside of the communities for creating those fuel reduced halos to affect wildfire behavior before it gets to the community. And then the threat zone is that orange kind of region there. Next slide. All right, so I'm going to touch on just the highlights of what we did differently. So these are all pieces, these bullet points are basically everything that was not included in 2004 or 2015 Community Wildfire Protection Plan. So we use Vibrant Planet's Land Tender software, which we used a light version for it when we were analyzing the Lake Tahoe West project a few years back. Then Vibrant Planet took it to a whole nother level. And so this has got, fire models and fuel models and LiDAR and all kinds of data in there that's going to help us to prioritize our landscape. In the past CWPPs, we weren't able to actually prioritize the entire landscape. So we were just really looking at mostly the defense zone around the edges of the communities. This allows us to have no area not analyzed. So in 2004, for example, inside the communities, we focused on the WUI then, and inside the communities, there were larger parcels that were undeveloped, and we wanted to go after money to get to treat those areas, but they weren't analyzed in the CWPP, so we weren't eligible. So we had the donut hole that was not included. So as we move forward, this was a big push from the fire districts. They didn't want any land unanalyzed. It doesn't mean that we can treat all those acres in 5 years by any means, but it gives us the flexibility to treat those areas if either funding or some other opportunity comes up, or it's the priority to treat. So and we'll show you a little bit about that work as well. We also included a chapter on vulnerable communities that hadn't been addressed in the past. But we know we have elderly, we have handicapped, low income folks that the, defensible space and home hardening is very low on their list. It's not something that they're really considering. So we have a little part in here where we can, at least we're identifying it and we're trying to find ways to do outreach and as well as be able to get grant funds to be able to support some of those vulnerable communities. We also added water infrastructure, but this is not a water infrastructure plan. This is, we reached out to the Tahoe Water for Fire Suppression Partnership to add a chapter in here because they were having issues with when they talked about water infrastructure with the fire folks, they were like, that's a water issue. And then they go to the water folks, they say that's a fire issue. So this way now it's somewhere, we've got this in the middle where this can give them some additional advantage of getting funding for upgrading our water systems. Because currently we have, 4-inch lines or something that's what's supposed to come out of a hydrant, but they need much bigger lines. It's a big project, but this could give them some funding advantage. So we included it. And evacuation zones, this came out of, this was a big push from the fire districts, but it was also a big part of the public process. We got a lot of comments on evacuation. I know that you've probably heard a lot about evacuation. We heard about it today already. And again, this is not an evacuation plan. This is more of a community document that provides guidance to homeowners and residents on what they need to do to prepare to evacuate. It's not going to tell you where to go, but it's going to help you to have your go bag ready and all the things that you need to understand what red flag days are when you're at high risk, that sort of thing. So what we've done, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the fire triangle, but you've got oxygen, heat, and fuel, or there's a wildfire one that's topography, weather, and fuel. The only thing that we have any influence over is the fuel. And so that's why we do fuel reduction. And so here with the evacuation zones, we created a 500-foot buffer off of the edge of the highways, the major evacuation zones. And we have, and we put those as #1 priority project areas. So they're going to be very difficult because you're going to multiple landowners, big linear areas. But we feel like my personal opinion is that no plan is going to change the fact that you're going to be sitting on the road. There's no, I mean, if you're waking up at 2:30 in the morning and the embers are flying and you're having to get out, everybody's doing the same thing. You're going to be on the road. So we need to make the roads a safer place to be because you're probably going to be sitting on that road. We're not going to be getting out very quickly. So anyway, that was another highlight here that we really feel strongly about. We also have a section on the Caldor fire and the lessons learned. And I remember there an article after the fire where it said the Christmas Valley miracle. And since I've been working on this since 2002, I felt more like, well, we've been preparing for the Caldor fire for 20 years. And what we did was relatively successful. We did have some favorable wind and some favorable weather, but we had an amazing first response. The fire protection districts, CAL FIRE, NDF, all the fire protection districts, it was pretty heroic. So anyway, but we did have fuel reduction places where the fire laid down a little bit and it gave them a chance to be able to stop it. So we feel like the model that we've already been using is the one that we're going to continue using, but with a little bit more precision. So we feel really good about that. So there's a whole section in there on that. And then fire adapted communities. The Tahoe Resource Conservation District has been running a fire adapted communities program since 2017, which funds all the fire protection districts to run their own programs, which includes free defensible space inspections. It includes chipping services. And we do work days on the different weekends. We bring, work crews out to neighborhoods and do work days for the different folks that have organized. And I will just say one thing, in the 20-some years that I've been doing this, when we started doing defensible space inspections, we felt like we were protecting Lake Tahoe one parcel at a time. And then you started to realize, wow, maybe you're only as safe as your neighbor. And then all of a sudden, and now I feel like if you're not doing this at a community scale, the risk is really high for the communities that aren't working together because the first structure ignites and that's when it's kind of off to the races. So we have to stop the first ignition. So Fire Adapted Community has been a very successful program. We have, I think, over 65 communities. Firewise has come on and people are doing the Firewise recognition program, which is also really great. So lastly, just the usability part, and this will be where I hand it off to Cheyenne. If anybody has seen the 2015 CWPP, it's a 3-ring binder that's about this thick. It's a massive document and most folks, it's on their shelf and they probably haven't, I mean, at my age, I can't even hardly lift the dang thing. But so it has become very cumbersome. Yeah, I know. I'm just feeling old these days. it just became a very unusable document. I mean, it was great. It still was, it served the function to get us funding, which is really another main part of what a CWPP does for us. It gives us the planning document that's needed to get the funding, but it's just not that usable. So what we have now is that we have a static PDF version of the document that's very pared down as far as the verbiage. It's a lot more readable, but we've also set it up in a GIS hub in a series of story maps. And so it's a lot more accessible to the general public. And as it discusses these different things like water infrastructure or evacuation zones or how we address certain things, there's links that'll take you to the deeper dive that you want if you want to go to the evacuation plan. Because again, this is not an evacuation planning document. This is for communities, for risk assessment, for figuring out where we need to do the work. And as I said, it's a primary funding document. So with that, I want to say thank you, and I'm going to introduce Cheyenne Newfer, who has been leading the charge for Tahoe Resource Conservation District. And I'll just say, you can only imagine how hard it is to coordinate amongst the number of stakeholders that we've had. So she's done a really great job. And on to you. Thank you. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. I am Cheyenne Newfer, and I am the CWPP coordinator at the Tahoe Resource Conservation District. So going off what Mike said about collaboration being one of the requirements, is that was a huge piece for us, is to include the public during this whole process. So as we very much started updating the whole CWPP, we engaged with the public. And this is really important because CWPPs are unique to the region it serves. So we wanted it, specific to the Tahoe Basin. So what we did, we had 3 public meetings throughout the basin. And at these meetings, we had fire chiefs, other fire personnel, we had stakeholders, such as our water infrastructure and our water purveyors, and then the public, of course. So we had those 3 public meetings to get feedback and general ideas about what they wanted to see in the plan. And then we also had our basin-wide survey, which was live all summer, and we got over 600 responses from Tahoe Basin residences. So that was really important. And then we had other engagement through social media. We did fire adapted communities workshops, other local workshops, lots of social media interactions. And then we also have our public comment period. So we have a 30-day public comment period, which is currently live. But we just wanted to make sure that the public was heard during this process. So, and as Mike was saying, we wanted this update to be really engaging and useful, just not a document sitting on the shelf collecting dust. So what we did is we utilized ArcGIS Hub and story maps to host our CWPP. So I'm going to do a quick demo of that, just show you guys really quickly what it looks like. So here is our Lake Tahoe Basin CWPP hub page. So this page houses all of our CWPP materials. So we'll have all of our maps, we have updates, and we have our actual print CWPP document here as well on the left-hand side. And we have our story map, our Lake Tahoe Basin story map here on the right-hand side. So we also have 4 different story maps that go into each region of the basin. Our CWPP is unique in the fact that it's basically 4 CWPPs in one. This covers the entire basin. So I'm going to hop right into our story map. So it looks like this, and just as a quick navigation information, this is our navigation bar right here is kind of like you can hop to chapters, or you can read it as a full story map if you just keep scrolling. So as we scroll, we get a quick background information and information about our region. Here's one area where this just shows how more interactive this plan is that we can scroll over, and this map specifically is our fire occurrence map. So we can click on here, get some information about the Angora fire. If you keep scrolling, you'll see more information that's helpful. And then we also included interactive images. So this is a image of before and after the Comstock era in Fallen Leaf Lake. So somebody can come in here and learn more. So it's a really engaging document. If they want to skip right towards the water infrastructure piece, we can hop right to it and learn more here. And obviously, like what Mike was saying is we have links so people can really dive in. And it's all linked to our actual document too. So if you want to learn more, this is a summary of our CWPP document. So you can always learn more there as well. So pulling up our WUI designation map, we have our information like our definitions on our left-hand side, and we have our WUI map here. All these maps can be expanded and zeroed into. You can zero in basically to your neighborhood scale and click on it and see what zone we're talking about. So this is our community WUI intermix. Let me move this. We can exit there. One other spot I wanted to show was our fuels reduction treatments map. So this map is incredibly important to the CWPP. This shows all of our prioritized treatment areas. So one can come in here instead of just seeing a list like in our 2015 CWPP of list of all of our project areas, we can actually dive in. Oops. And see specifically these treatment areas and which tier they are here. And I'm going to let Mike explain this more.
All right. So, so we didn't actually do a project list. We, Land Tender ran its analysis based on assets and safety, which is what the focus of the CWPP is. And it developed project areas. So we have high priority project areas. The darker the purple, the more high priority it is. And most of them do straddle the neighborhoods. You can also see the evacuation zones are in dark purple. So they've also been identified as high priority. We put it into a tiering system. So we have tier 1 project areas. And from that, we will develop projects as needed. We're going to go through it when we do the TFFT workshop coming in February, and we're going to start developing projects based on the CWPP for the LTRA list and the EIP tracker. So you can, anyway, so all I'll say to finish this is that when we worked with the fire districts, we were, it's a very complex piece of software, and it was giving us really weird outcomes. And then we just decided like, we really need to focus on assets and safety. And as soon as we did that, the model started actually corroborating with, so Martin Goldberg at Lake Valley, he sees the projects come out and he says, those are exactly the places that I would hit first. We, up in North Tahoe fire, it identified the evacuation zone leaving Tahoe City. And that was a place that for all of them at North Tahoe fire, they were like, that's our #1 priority. And and so we had some ground truthing and we felt really confident that the software was working. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take an individual dark purple polygon from here, and then we'll rerun that in Land Tender, and that will start to spit out projects either based on the amount of money that we have or the amount of acres that we can treat in any given time. So there's ways that depending on the opportunities that we have, we wanted this to be the most flexible document and the most flexible risk assessment that we could give to the land managers and the fire protection districts. So if they've got a list and they're going to go through the whole thing and realize that that's where I need to go, they can do that. If they have an opportunity for shared stewardship with the Forest Service over here somewhere, they can do that. If I saw a comment about self towers as being a fire risk, they're all covered. It's in here. So there's no place that's been unanalyzed. So everything is available to be asked for funding through this CWPP. So anyway, so again, just trying to maintain a high level of flexibility, leave no land uncovered so that if there's an opportunity to get there and do the treatment, we can. So we feel like we've hit a pretty good spot with this, a real sweet spot in being able to be flexible and get a lot of work done.
Great, thanks, Mike. And before we hop back into the presentation, I also wanted to show here where we have the EIP tracker. It's directly linked into the story map, so people don't even have to leave the story map to go view all of the relevant data and graphs with the CWPP program. So down here we have, all these different graphs people can explore and then go back into the story map. So I'm going to go back to our presentation. Like we were saying earlier, the Lake Tahoe Basin CWPP and all the materials, including the story map, the hub, and the document are up for public comment right now until December 20th. So that is on Friday that we'll still be taking public comment. So what's next? Once public comment period is over, we will have our final steering committee meeting on January 7th to review public comments and make any necessary changes. And then in January, we will have the final review and we'll be getting signatures for the CWPP. And then moving into February is when we'll officially publish the CWPP for the basin. All right, and here is a link to that hub page that houses all of those CWPP materials. So if there is any questions from the board, we'll take them now.
Thank you. Questions or comments from the board? Cody?
Yeah, no, it's a great website with a lot of information and really cool to see. I'm curious on the evacuation stuff. I know that it's in there and that's being considered kind of where, I guess, is that a group of people that are going to create like an evacuation committee, or kind of just curious as far as how the approach for the evacuation stuff is?
So no, for that part, but what we will do is that this is now a prioritized project area. So we will seek funding to start doing treatment along the evacuation zones. That's the purpose of this document. Yeah, not an evacuation plan, but one that will help to get funding. And we've been having discussions about how we might make a really big ask to maybe SNPLMA or something for a 6-year period, but it's going to be a lot of entry agreements because there's going to be a lot in that linear zone of different ownerships and things. So we've been talking about how do we maybe take smaller chunks, but it just elevates it to a priority level that we that we can go actually ask for the funding and feel like we can be successful to start treating those areas.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think that and maybe this isn't the right, because I think you're more about treating the forest and it's not as much about coordinating the agencies. But I think a big part of what we learned in Caldor is the importance of the Nevada, California agencies really communicating. And I feel like that's, again, maybe this isn't the right place for it, but we really need to put that coordination together because it's more than just fire. It's law enforcement, it's public works, it's our transportation providers. It's a lot of people that we need to figure out how to convene. So thank you. Great
Absolutely.
stuff.
That's the truth. Yes.
So I just want to hop in real quick. Kat McIntyre for the record. Cody, there is a regional evacuation coordination group that does meet, and it is the fire chiefs and law enforcement. And they're the ones who pushed out the Lake Tahoe Basin regional evacuation plan that ended comment period, I think mid-November. And that is really, a comprehensive look at area by area, what evacuation looks like for the Tahoe Basin and what you need to know in order to be prepared. So that level of coordination does exist currently.
And Ms. Aldine?
So Kat, I guess my question is, Doug Flaherty, who comments quite frequently on matters concerning evacuation, he helped to organize the funding of an independent evaluation. Has that been reviewed, and is that going to be perhaps some of those recommendations integrated into the evacuation plan that's being prepared locally?
That's a great question. I believe it has been reviewed at the individual level at each fire district or within each law enforcement sector. So for Placer County or El Dorado County, I don't have an update on whether they intend to utilize that analysis in any way, shape, or form to shape what they're currently doing. We can ask that, but unknown at this time is
It
what I
would be
would
good
say.
to know. I mean, I appreciate when independent initiatives are taken, as was the case with this particular evacuation plan. So I would hope that they would review it, and if there's substance, that it makes sense integrating into our own plan. And I think, I'd hate to think that the money and the time and effort to produce the plan was wasted.
Other comments from the board? Ashley, Ms. Conrad-Zeta.
Yeah, Ashley Conrad-Zeta for the record. Thanks so much for this update. I'm really excited to see that this is a living CWPP that can be pushed and updated with more regularity, because that's clearly what we need in this age of catastrophic mega fires. So it's really, really great to see it in action here. And just, coming from representing the state of California, I think knowing that California funds were used, especially coming from the cap and trade proceeds, were used for this kind of active result is really, really great. So thanks for being a guinea pig to some extent on it. And I really look forward to seeing what it looks like with those annual data pushes. And how much it helps you really hone in on funding and partnerships. One comment was just if you met at all with American Forest Foundation and their My Sierra Woods project, because they are doing a lot of work to aggregate landholders, especially in linear areas. Private landholders should do some of those private lands treatments. And, they have some numbers and figures on how much it costs to do that and what the CEQA and NEPA process looks like. So they may just have some useful data as you move forward with this basin-wide approach.
Great. That's a great resource. Thank you. We have not contacted them. Yeah, that's great because we are questioning how we're going to get that kind of thing done.
Madam Chair?
Oh, thank you. I just concluded my last Sierra Nevada Conservancy Board meeting. I've served on that board for the last 2 years. And I was really fascinated by a lot of the work we're doing and trying to bring market solutions to mills, to biomass, to other opportunities so that we are not just looking for handouts, that we're also feeding and finding usable products out of the wood. And it's really tremendous, the amount of work that's gone on, not only with your our CWPP, but the efforts for so many to develop workforce, the scholarship programs the Tahoe Fund is doing at South Lake Tahoe, and then the projects we're doing with the Carson Mill, as well as now we just approved the Hobart Mills, the Alpenglow Mill at North Lake Tahoe, headed out of Truckee, north of Truckee. And then the biomass, both at North Star and at Eastern Regional Landfill. So there's a lot of work going on in this arena right now, and I think it will only benefit us all. Thank you for your leadership on this. I did share with people earlier that if you didn't get a chance, during the Franklin fire, the Pepperdine students were all sheltered in place, and there's great video of what they were experiencing being in a type 1 designed building to stay safely in place and not evacuate on the roads while the fire swept through. And I think, again, that has to be part of our education process, that if we all get on the road at one time and we all don't listen to directions, it will be chaos. And so you've got to look for those hardened structures and those abilities. And I've got I can text anybody who wants to see that clip. It was really remarkable. So thank you for your leadership on this, going back to 2004.
Thank you. Thank you. So yeah, being here for 20 years, I think I can honestly say that it's never been brighter, right? We have all the pieces in place. We've got the partnerships. We have a mill that's, not 150 miles away. That doesn't make a lot of sense to drive chips there. It kind of embodied energy turns into diesel at some point,
Right.
It takes more energy to get it there than the energy it'll produce.
Yep.
So yeah, I feel like all the pieces are in place. I think that we're in a really good spot to actually accelerate. I think that I'm going to go out on a limb and say that we'll be able to do what we did in 20 years in the next 10. But that's how much momentum I think we have.
Any other questions or comments from the board? All right. Director Reagan?
Not from the board, but thank you, Madam Acting Chair Julie Reagan. I just really wanted to thank Kat and the Resource Conservation District for a great presentation, and especially to share with the board the valuable partnership that we have with the Tahoe RCD and with Mike's leadership and his longstanding commitment to this issue in fire and forest health. We really are poised on some breakthroughs, and I just wanted to underscore that point. You usually hear from the RCD, the Tahoe Resource Conservation District, in matters of invasive species, which they're a massive partner in our prevention and control programs for aquatic invasive species. But I think this was a very germane topic to something that you hear every single month about, the risk of catastrophic fire, of evacuation, and you and Cheyenne did a great job. So thanks for being here.
Absolutely agree. Thank you both so very much. 3, actually. Kat, did not mean to leave you out. Thank you. Let's now move on then to agenda item 10, which is reports. Director Reagan, you're back up.
Back up. Thank you. Julie Reagan, TRPA's Executive Director. We have a really fantastic holiday lunch that's awaiting you, but we do have a couple of items to get through, so bear with me, but we'll move through as expeditiously as possible. I wanted to do a quick recap in what is just a couple of slides for the year, and if I could have the next slide. 2024, it's hard to summarize in about 5 or 10 minutes, the work of, I mean, quite literally thousands of people in this year of action that I'm dubbing 2024. But I have some acknowledgements that I think are really important to make. And it's my great privilege to lead this agency and under your guidance. But we've done this all collectively together, not just TRPA, but really the greater Team Tahoe partnership. So the accomplishments that we're going to be talking about and the challenges are shared equally among hundreds and thousands of people in the Tahoe Basin. But if you look at this chart, which is just a quick snapshot of a handful of some pretty big milestones, any one of these in a year might be fantastic. But when you take them all together of 25 actions that you voted out at the board level, 3 of which were major policy updates in our environmental threshold standards, improvements and additional protections for Tahoe Yellowcrest, stream environment zone, wetlands, and also the aquatic invasive species protections that we just were talking about. So 3 big scientifically based threshold updates that you voted on in May, which going to the right of the green piece there, the SEZ, stream environment zone, we haven't had really any fanfare, but at the time that you voted to strengthen and make harder the target for SEZ, we actually have achieved it this year. So think back of like 40 years, people have been around the basin for a long time. That standard was adopted by the governing board in the 80s. And literally thousands of people have worked on this for 40 years. And this year we hit the mark. And we still are tabulating all the acres restored for 2023. But some of them we know that happened. The Upper Truckee Marsh on the South Shore, the Rabe Meadow right here off Kale Drive. And so when those acres are tabulated, we'll do a bigger report out in the threshold evaluation next year. But, you know, I wish we could have some biodegradable confetti that would drop, because that's a huge, huge achievement for Tahoe. And one is a pillar of the foundation and framework for protecting wetlands from building, because we developed more than 3/4 of the wetlands before we even had a regional plan in place. So that's a highlight for the year. And then a couple things to note: 96 units of affordable housing constructed. It's not nearly enough, but that's a big number. And when you think of potentially hundreds of people and families that are benefiting from improved housing, getting out of substandard housing conditions, that will also bring environmental benefits, a bright spot. The Motel 6 acquisition, that's 31 acres of Upper Truckee Marsh, and a lot of you have participated in that. And the Conservancy, of course, is owed a great deal of gratitude for the perseverance on this one, but TRPA mitigation funds also contributed $3.5 million, and other partners like the League to Save Lake Tahoe and the Tahoe Fund to make that a reality, and more work to do. And then, of course, the Restoration Act, which was passed this year in a standalone bill in a Congress that, if you have to go back to the 1800s for the amount of bills that actually got passed out, going back to the 1800s, I don't want to call it the least productive Congress, but that is a term that's out there. But no offense to our members in Congress, it's just the way it works in Washington sometimes. But we got one of those bills passed over the finish line in a standalone manner. So it was a big achievement for Team Tahoe. I'll take the next slide. And then just a couple of pictures to round through. Pictures, you know, worth 1,000 words, and it's often better to show in action some of those accomplishments. So just, you know, guiding you from kind of left to right around 11 a.m. on the clock. Snowshoeing, about 300 Lake Tahoe middle schoolers got out up on Heavenly Mountain, and that's with Victoria Ortiz, who's our resident environmental educational expert. Big support from the Vail Company and Heavenly Mountain Resort and the South Tahoe Environmental Education Coalition. But a lot of our kids in our schools all around the basin, they don't get up to ski. They don't have the funds to go out and enjoy a ride up the gondola. So this program has been going on for a number of years, and we play a great leadership role in that, and our staff does a great job. The Motel 6, the More Nature Coming Soon. If you haven't been by Motel 6 on the South Shore, the signs have gone up in the last couple of months. And it's just amazing, you know, to think about the possibilities of restoring that wetland. And then the incredible new public access and environmental benefits that will be reaped from the partnership. Also, Sugar Pine Village, that's actually a picture of the Sugar Pine Village, the 68 units that are online now, and in total, 248 units will be recognized. And then Catherine Hayhoe Dr. Catherine Hayhoe spoke here, and we had the opportunity to go to the Science Center up in Incline Village and work with her and meet with her and our science partners about climate and how it actually can bring people together to talk about how we solve this existential threat to the basin and to the planet around climate. And we had a chance to work with her. She's a chief scientist from the Nature Conservancy. And all the while we were doing that, we were onboarding some key members of our executive team, and we have our new general counsel, Graham St. Michel, and we have Chad Cox, our chief financial and administrative officer. You approved the Meeks Bay restoration project. So just a lot of reason to celebrate. I'll take the next slide. The Get Defensive campaign, touching base with the Resource Conservation District and the work of the partners to get the word out that we still can't forget the value of defensible space. It was a revisiting of a campaign that we did after Angora that really broke through the clutter, because it is a little confusing for homeowners to understand. Is it okay if I rake my pine needles because I want to do right by the lake? But we developed all new procedures and explained it through that public education campaign. We also want to celebrate the city's implementation around Earth Day of Drink Tahoe Tap, and encouraging local use versus single-use plastic water bottles, and attacking that microplastics issue was a huge priority for the Basin Partnership. So kudos to the city in implementing that, but our whole partnership through Take Care has been supporting it. We have Bike to Work week and month, and some pretty impressive results around that. 9,900 trips reduced, and 79,000 miles pedaled on non-motorized recreation. So really exciting. You approved the biggest solar project in the history of the basin, and that was at SDPUD, also around Earth Day. And then new innovation like the burn bot there that's pictured in the lower left. The Tahoe Fund and some of our other partners are really driving innovation in that forest health space so that we can think outside the box in terms of how we address these catastrophic threats to the lake. And we'll keep going. We had some great news in the destination stewardship front, and that is the July 4th this year produced, I think, 80% less trash to clean up the next day on July 5th. And that didn't happen by accident. It was by galvanizing the partnership around destination stewardship, working with land managers, working with our private partners, the League to Slave Lake Tahoe, the hundreds and hundreds of volunteers, the Tahoe Fund, and all the partners that came together to say, we're not gonna trash Lake Tahoe this year. And it worked. And then, of course, no one can forget the summit this year with Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg, who announced $30 million in funding for Lake Tahoe transportation. And that flowed right into the passage of the Lake Tahoe Restoration Act, with that picture now on Cindy's plaque, which you can have in your office forever, which it's a wonderful reminiscent of that power of collaboration and partnership. We do better when we work together. And then working around the dial, that's a picture in the lower right of Lydell Wyatt, who's the new tribal liaison for the Washoe tribe of Nevada and California. We've offered some office space. Lydell comes into our office here at TRPA. We supported that with many partners to have a 3-year commitment of a dedicated tribal liaison that we can work with to make sure the tribe isn't just, a box that you check on a form to consult with the tribe. We're actually getting meaningful collaboration on projects ranging all around the basin in multiple resource areas. And we were really pleased that Chairman Smokey actually attended the holiday party as well. And we all appreciated those of you who were able to join us just about 2 weeks ago on that. We recognized the Best in the Basin award winners a couple meetings ago. You can see the great crowd that gathered there to celebrate projects that are doing right by the environment. And then on the lower left, that was a great day when the director of the National U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Martha Williams, was in town, and 100,000 Lahontan cutthroat trout were released into the lake. And those are pictures of representatives from some kids from the Washoe tribe that were there, and tribal elders. It was a huge event to really appreciate the sacred nature of that endemic species to the lake. And now, of course, we're trying to reintroduce that, not just in our tributaries, but in the lake. And then just a couple more highlights. We talked about Sugar Pine Village, but I just love this picture in the upper left because, you know, you always have the serious ribbon cutting in the picture, and then you have the, oh, be silly, you know, picture that the photographer asks you. So we were all pretty excited. Brooke Lane is next to me in the front row, and Mayor Bass is there, and staff and partners. But really, the woman in the orange sweatshirt in the front was the person who actually the speech brought the whole house down. There wasn't a dry eye in the house when she gave a little piece of into what it meant for her to move into a nice quality place to live, having lived and grown up in Tahoe and lived in some pretty sketchy environments. And it, I think, made everyone appreciate that this is hard. This is hard all over the country, but we're doing it. You know, we're actually leading the way in a lot of ways here in Tahoe. And then the picture on the right is the Tahoe Keys. We finished year 3 collectively, the partnership on the control methods test for aquatic invasive weeds. And we'll be coming back to you with some updates on that. The lower right is the picture of Get the Lead Out. You know, those lead cables were in Lake Tahoe for almost 100 years. And at one point, I think we all were worried that it might be another 100 years before we could take action. So a huge shout out to Evan Dreyer and the nonprofit that really drove a lot of action. The League to Save Lake Tahoe got the ball rolling. It was, you know, there were threats of litigation over the course of this. But I wanted to thank our staff. Sometimes we get forgotten, but we approved that project to do the removal. And then when it stalled, we helped facilitate working with our partners to bring it back. And when they brought the barge out, it had to be inspected for invasive species. It had come from another area. So our team had to mobilize to make sure that the process of doing this big project wasn't introducing by, you know, unintentional consequence, some invasive species. So, and then speaking of invasive species, that's Taylor Talac, removing the mats on 17 acres of weeds. And that successful project is the biggest to date of control in the basin. And then not to mention, you know, all the work that our long range planning and planning staff have done on housing and launching our new phase of work called Cultivating Community and Conserving the Basin. So incredible work that will continue into next year and a couple years beyond. But we got that off the ground after you voted last December, a year ago exactly, to take the bold step to try to make housing more affordable. So great response there. And then my last slide on accomplishments. It's our 55th anniversary. And some of you were on the board when we turned 50. And if you look at the flag kind of hanging on the wall, this was the flag that flew over the United States Capitol for our 50th anniversary. And I can't believe that's been 5 years already, but December of '69 is when President Nixon signed the compact between California and Nevada, which had gone through the legislatures a few years prior. And so we're celebrating that in Tahoe in Depth, which I understand we have some copies for you to take with and get into a little bit of the history, but why our partnership between Nevada and California is so strong. And we are stronger than ever going into what we do perceive as existential threats to the basin. We got a wonderful letter just this week from President Biden and saying congratulations on it. And I want to thank Megan Hayes, our presidential appointee, for helping facilitate that. And Megan's been instrumental. She was very instrumental in the summit with Secretary Buttigieg's office and is always there for us to help. And it was just nice to get that recognition around what is truly a unique public policy achievement and having a compact that's lasted, a very unique compact on its own right in the basin. And so celebrating 55 years is a big deal. So what's coming up? Proud of our progress. We've made a lot of ground, covered a lot of ground. We've made a lot of gains, but we still have a lot of problems to solve. There's a lot of work ahead. And I really have to thank you for your volunteer commitment to this board. You all have very busy day jobs and many responsibilities in your public policy life and your private business life. And we need you. We need your ideas because we have some big things coming down the line. Just a couple to highlight. In January, you're going to be hearing the Homewood Mountain Resort Master Plan and Project update. The Advisory Planning Commission spent 6 hours on that just last week, and they did an amazing job. We're going to send you the link so that you can watch it, so that we don't have to necessarily repeat some of that, so that you could prepare over the next month. We've got just at legal committee this afternoon, a discussion around the Tahoe Blue Event Center. We'll be bringing that back to the full board in the next couple of months. We have the threshold evaluation report coming. We were initially planning to bring you that in January, but with Homewood and the public interest, that might be too much to squeeze into one meeting. So we're still working through that. The housing work, the Tahoe Living Working Group, and that will be ongoing throughout the year. And then another plug to save the date for our governing board strategic planning retreat with you, and where we'll be having, you know, our new chair and our new vice chair in kicking off a new 2-year cycle of, you know, where do we want to move the needle? Like, you know, if everything's important, nothing's important. We have to prioritize what we can do with our limited resources. And that'll be a great conversation that we can have with the full board. So happy holidays, and I appreciate your attention.
That was a lot. Thank you, Julie. I think we're gonna do, as part of reports, we're gonna do 10A1, I think, before we get to general counsel report, which is the executive director performance review and proposed compensation. That can be found on page 235. As a reminder to the public, after staff presentation and discussion on this item, we'll hear public comment. So Angela, if you could please present.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon, members of the governing board. I'm Angela Atchley, Director of Human Resources for TRPA. I'm here today to introduce the agenda item regarding the performance review for the executive director. As you know, every year we request feedback from TRPA staff and governing board members related to the overall performance of the executive director. And this year we sent a survey link to TRPA staff and governing board members requesting feedback on 6 core leadership competencies. This request also included a written summary of accomplishments provided by Ms. Reagan for the time period of December 2023 to November 2024. And that written summary is included in the staff report as attachment A and starts on page 238. The results of the performance review feedback survey can be found as attachment B in the staff report, and that starts on page 244. As you can see, the overall feedback was overwhelmingly positive, with 100% ranking her fully effective or effective in her role. And so based on these results, staff is requesting a consideration of a proposed annual pay increase from $207,926 to $218,323, effective December 9th. We are also requesting a one-time incentive bonus compensation of $5,000 as part of TRPA's STAR Awards based on the performance through this time period. And I'll turn it back to you with any questions or comments.
Thank you. Any board members, questions or comments on this item? Ms. Conrad Zeta.
Ashley Conrad Zeta for the record. So 2 things. One is it says eight members of the governing board responded, but that just shows a 17% response rate. And so I just, if there are,
That is correct. So
Okay.
there were a total of 40 responses, 8 of governing board, the rest was TRPA
I see.
staff.
So you're saying of the total. Got it. Not the percentage of governing board respondents.
Right.
Okay, that's one. So that's just a little unclear, but I guess I see that summary there, but it would be helpful to just know, generally speaking, what percentage of the governing board versus staff is responding to, like, so 40 staff responded, what percentage of staff was that? Just to get a sense of how people are reacting. You see what I mean? So
Yeah, so on page, on the results,
yeah, so on page 244, if you could say TRPA staff, it's 40 of the total number of TRPA
of
staff
TRPA staff.
versus total number of respondents, and 8 of 15, right? So just to make it clear what the response rate was, that would be helpful. And then my other question is just, what are the annual increases like for the rest of the staff members at TRPA? And is the percentage being awarded to the executive director similar, much greater? What's the comparison there?
Yes, the request is for 5%, which is in keeping with the percentage that was given to senior leadership.
But what about the rest of the staff? That's senior leadership,
The
but what about
rest of the staff was an average of 4%.
Mr. Bass?
Yeah, my only comments, I am one of the governing board members that didn't respond, and I'm really sorry. Ms. Ashley did a great job of trying to continue to remind us, but I'm wondering, can we still, to have that in her record, for the record, it's all hundreds for me. I think you do a great job. But I'm just curious, can we still do the survey so that it goes into her employment record, or have we passed that?
No, there was a deadline. There was a time
Okay.
frame in that
Great.
survey.
Yep.
It's really good self-honesty though, Cody. Ms. Gustafson?
I just wanted to take a minute to thank Julie for an incredible year. And I think for all of us on the governing board, the reauthorization of the Lake Tahoe Restoration Act caps it all, right? There's so many pieces of activity that take a long time to bring forward. And your efforts on that go far beyond 1 year's efforts to make that happen and to develop the relationships you've had. I love this format because there were opportunities here to opportunity areas for us to work on, as well as ideas on focus for the future. So I think, Angela, I like the format. I hope the other governing board members do as well, because it gives us that chance for feedback that I think is extremely positive for Julie to see where board members and staff have suggestions as well as praise and accolades. So great job, Julie, and I strongly support the recommended actions.
Ms. Aldine?
As people are fond of reminding me, I've been here a long time. And I've been on this board, let's see how many, Juan Palma was the executive director when I joined the board in 2003. That's a long time ago. And I have to say that almost without exception, the transition from Joanne to Julie has really been seamless. Maybe it's because the two of them worked collaboratively with one another for such a long time, but Julie was extremely well prepared to step into this role, which is a challenge, on a daily basis. But you seem to be able to maintain the same level of enthusiasm. Now, in your darker moments, I'm sure, I'm sure you use a lot of, language that we can't repeat here at the dais. But I appreciate the fact that in addition to being a very effective executive director, you also continue to be probably one of our most effective cheerleaders. And that's important in order to keep the staff motivated, in order to keep the board motivated, in order to keep our supporters, motivated and supporting our efforts to improve the basin. So thank you.
All right, thank you, board. With that, let's go to public comment. Any members of the public wishing to comment in person, please come up to the podium. Welcome, Gavin.
Good afternoon, I believe. Yeah, afternoon. So I want to address the event center for the full board because it's only going to legal committee today.
Oh, sorry. Hey, Gavin, sorry. We're just going to do public comment on Julie's recommendation.
Oh, sorry. I thought we were doing full public comment for that at the end.
Nope, give me like 2 minutes. We'll get
Great. Well, since I'm standing up here, it's very nice to work with Julie.
there. Thank you, Gavin. Okay, not seeing anyone else. Is there anyone online wishing to comment on this item?
There are no hands raised to comment.
Okay, with that, I'm looking for a motion.
I'd like to move approval.
Okay, we have 2 motions.
Oh, sorry, I'll move approval on a motion to increase their base pay as recommended on page 235 of the packet.
Perfect, thank you. And a roll call, please, Maria.
Ms. Aldine?
Yes.
Mr. Bass?
Yes.
Mr. DeCara? Ms. Conrad Seda?
Yes.
Ms. Hill? Ms. Faustinos?
Yes.
Mr. Keycapper?
Yes.
Mr. Henigman?
Yes.
Mr. Rice?
Yes.
Ms. Lane?
Yes.
Mr. Settlemeyer?
Yes.
Ms. Loomer? Ms. Gustafson?
Yes.
Ms. Williamson?
Yes.
Madam Vice Chair, the motion passes.
Thank you. And a second motion, please.
Motion to provide a one-time performance incentive as part of TRPA's Star Awards for exemplary staff performance.
And Maria, can you please call the roll?
Ms. Aldine?
Yes.
Mr. Bass?
Yes.
Mr. DeCara?
Aye.
Ms. Conrad Seda?
Yes.
Ms. Hill? Ms. Faustinos?
Yes.
Mr. Keycapper?
Yes.
Mr. Henigman?
Yes.
Mr. Rice?
Yes.
Ms. Lane?
Yes.
Mr. Settlemeyer?
Yes.
Ms. Loomer, Ms. Gustafson,
Yes.
Ms. Williamson.
Yes.
Madam Vice Chair, that motion passes.
All right, thank you. And before we move on from this item, you want to podium it?
Yeah.
All right, Julie, we're going to take you at the podium. So Julie, this is on behalf of the board, and Cindy alluded to this earlier, but this September, we celebrated Congress extending the Lake Tahoe Restoration Act as a standalone bill. This is just such a big deal. When the original LTRA of 2000 expired, it was 5 years before the passage of the LTRA reauthorization of 2016, and that was 5 years of lowered federal investment in Tahoe. This extension will greatly benefit Tahoe for the next 10 years. It will maintain the momentum and investment in the EIP to get critical restoration projects completed on the ground. And while this was a group effort for Team Tahoe, we want to take a moment to thank you for all the critical roles that you played in making this happen. Julie led a trip of 22 entities to DC this year to show the importance and impact of the LTRA. She organized and spoke at a national press conference on the DC Mall to bring awareness to the act, and she provided testimony to the Federal Land Subcommittee on the extension. Julie, thank you. Without your leadership, we would not have made this achievement. So, to show this board's gratitude, I would like to present you with this. This is a framed copy of the final LTRA legislation signed by the Tahoe delegation. It includes a picture of Team Tahoe in DC with Senator Cortez Masto signing the draft LTRA that became law. Nice job.
And just so you know, the board members really had nothing to do with this. It was your incredible team, Kim, I don't know, Devin, I don't know, whoever put it together. So we just get to present it.
That's
Your-
right.
Your staff did
Yes,
it.
very
come here.
much. Look it out. Yay.
Great.
Thank you, Cindy.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Hey, this is a big surprise. You got me. Thank you so much. What an honor, and what an honor to work with this incredible board. Thank you for your support.
All right, let's move on then. We're next up is reports. Graham, any general counsel reports?
Yeah, just in the interest of time, I'm gonna keep this very quick and cut things down, but I would just second Julie's comment about Homewood. That'll come in January to the board. The APC, that meeting was more like 7 hours or more, I think. I'd like to make sure, like Julie said, that you get the link to the video and that we can really pinpoint where the discussion was. You know, there's a lot of public comments, but that was the APC meeting and the APC members and staff. We had a really robust discussion. I think, you know, a lot of that will come up again, but if you're able to view that, or at least focus on the minutes, if you want to do that, and really see what those issues, how the members grapple with that, and, you know, how they work through to that, that outcome, I think it'd be well worth our time and make that meeting probably, you know, help that meeting move along. So.
Great, thank you.
Yep. Yeah.
Thank you. All right. Are there any other governing board members that would like to be heard at this time for any reports? Any committees that would like to be heard at this time? Okay, with that, we'll move on to our final period of public comment. Gavin, you're up. And I'll just give our quick summary here. Any member of the public wishing to address the governing board on any item listed or not listed on the agenda, including items on consent calendar, may do so at this time. We will hear comments on any single topic on the agenda for up to but not to exceed 3 minutes. We'll hear as many unique comments as possible for up to but no more than 60 minutes. So go ahead, Gavin.
All right, appreciate it. Sorry with the hang up there earlier. You think I know how this works by now. So a lot of new board members, but a lot of people also probably do know that the league was one of the key stakeholders in developing and negotiating the event center permit. So we have a lot riding on that permit being enforced, full compliance with it. That includes a traffic performance monitoring plan. And well, I'll get into some detail. And we did submit a detailed letter yesterday evening that I hope you all have a chance to read. It's only about 4 pages long, fairly quick read as far as those things go. For the governing board, I'm bringing this up. We'll also speak at legal committee because, not only is the event center itself and non-compliance with permits a big issue for us, but it indicates an even bigger issue that we have with TRPA as a whole. And we've been talking about this for a couple of years now. It's no surprise. But we're becoming increasingly concerned about deferred implementation and enforcement of plans, mitigation measures, and permit conditions. These delays have created barriers to achieving and implementing thresholds and achieving the regional plan goals. There's plenty of areas where we've worked closely together with TRPA, a lot of what Julie spoke about today, highlights for us too. But there's some areas where it's just where it's really not working. TRPA is the agency that has to ensure that their plans and rules, the ones that you create and approve, are complied with. We've got a handful of examples: shoreline plan, parking on dirt, employer tip reduction permit, the VMT threshold, which carries a lot of parallels with this the event center issue right now. And then the event center itself. And we've negotiated all those plans and projects in good faith. We feel like, at least for the most part, and maybe exclusively, we've held up our end of the bargain. One example in transportation is directly funding pilot projects that have scaled across the basin, successfully advocating for funding, even though we don't necessarily agree where all that funding is going, but for the greater good. So TRPA's response to the event center's non-compliance must deter future non-compliance for large projects. That's a very, very key piece for us. And that's a big piece for you, the governing board as a whole, to think about. And due to the scale of the violations and the minor exceedance of the event center, combined with the fact that the integrity of the entire permit, the performance measure of no annual increase in VMT and no summer day increase in VMT can never be measured, so cannot be adaptively managed, is a serious issue. You cannot see that repeated, and it needs to be remedied through the event center. We proposed some specific remedies in our comment letter, talk about in a little more detail, legal committee. But if our recommendations proposal is followed through on, we could be willing to move on with the event center, talk about the caps, all these other issues around, all these other requests or issues around the event center. But until that's resolved, we're not able to carry forward in constructive conversations. So just want to make that clear for the event center and for a handful of issues regarding enforcement and compliance. And it'll be a consistent theme for us here, continue to be. So thanks for the time, and plenty more to come. And also enjoy your lunch and happy holidays.
Thank you. Actually,
Gavin, before you leave though, while the rest of the governing board members are here, your final statement, does that imply that you will not continue as a stakeholder for future stakeholder meetings concerning the event center and
Well, there's two
resolution?
different I realize I'm at time, maybe, this is allowed. Also, maybe the 5-minute for agencies could apply, but there's two different stakeholders in the event center. There's the stakeholders, 4 parties that agreed to the permit conditions, which are us, California Attorney General's Office, TDVA, and TRPA. And then there's a stakeholder group that was created by policy in the regional plan. We're going to be part of that. We're on that group. We'll be part of those conversations. But as far as moving forward with talking about any changes to the permit, which I know is on the docket, that's where we're not going to be able to have constructive conversations unless we can get the current issues remedied.
Well, I'm assuming that the conversation at the stakeholder group level may lead to some resolution to that.
Again, I hope so. We can get into some more detail with the stakeholder group. As one of the violations of the permit condition is stakeholder group has not been meeting this year on schedule.
Okay, well, we can discuss that further.
Thank you. Yeah.
And Ms. Waller?
Good afternoon. I'm going to echo a lot, but in more detail to Ellie Waller for the record. I'm going to read from the permit. Stakeholder coordination. Tahoe Douglas Visitors Authority shall organize coordination meetings with stakeholders to evaluate monitoring results to understand the cause and effects of factors, including those not specifically associated with the event center that may be affecting traffic patterns, volume, spillover parking from paid parking, and how to respond to monitoring and determine next with stakeholder permittee endorsement. It lists a bunch of people, the City of South Lake Tahoe, Douglas County, TRPA, Public Safety, and TTD. Didn't mention the league, but again, quarterly meetings. TDVA shall organize a quarterly meeting with governmental, environmental, and economic interests to evaluate the event center strategies and monitoring results the first 20 years of operation. I don't know where or when quarterly reports will be made available for public review. Annual coordination meetings, TDVA shall organize an annual meeting with stakeholders during the life of the event center to discuss transit service options, monitoring results, and projected transit needs. The public shall be invited and given an opportunity to comment. Don't know about that meeting either. Number 3 in this, and lastly, recommendation of additional management options to provide flexibility in the identification and implementation of most effective and cost efficient traffic reduction measures, equal or superior traffic reduction mitigation measures in Appendix C may be proposed subject to evaluation of effectiveness by a qualified transportation third-party consulting firm hired by TRPA, reviewed by the stakeholder group, and at the applicant's cost. As the permitting authority for the project, TRPA in consultation with TDVA will decide on additional measures to be implemented. The board annual monitoring report shall be completed by October 1. The additional measures shall be implemented before the next year of operations and no later than December 31st be heard by this board. We don't see that happening. Again, I've been following the event center since I moved to Douglas County to understand. I really would like to see this successful. The future of it could affect ad valorem taxes in Douglas County, and that shouldn't happen either. Looking forward to a more robust discussion at the legal committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to make comment in person? All right, no one else is coming forward, and it looks like I think we have one hand up online.
Yes, Madam Vice Chair, we actually have 2 hands up online.
Okay.
The first hand up was Doug Flaherty. Doug, please unmute to make your comment.
Thank you, Doug Flaherty, TahoeCleanAir.org. You guys have a past experience with government myself. The monitoring deficiencies on the part of TRPA, the deficiencies on the failure to meet the project approval requirements, the conditions, absolutely abysmal. Again, this is a major center. It can have significant impacts on the lake. But once my public comments are read and the others are read, people are really scratching their heads. Like, what in the world is happening here? There was no compliance monitoring on the part of TRPA. As just one example given, over and above what Ellie mentioned, there were supposed to be very specific criteria met for public surveys and workplace employee surveys and attending surveys. None of that was done. So I think you've all heard the phrase, you don't want to pick this hill to die on, but I hope you're not underestimating how significant this is, and to come back and try to modify and what will increase attendance in VMTs. You're going to have a major issue on your hands. People are not going to stand for it. The permit process represented right now by the staff report is not worth the paper it was written on. How can this happen? Who at the top is causing this to happen? Who completely ignored the permit conditions? And I want this board to ask questions. Please ask questions. Go through the public comment please ask the staff what happened here. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next hand up is Alan Miller. Alan, please unmute to make your comment.
Hi, I'm Alan Miller, professional engineer. You have my written comments for the record, including late comments submitted today concerning legal committee item 3, which, as I wrote from long experience, item 3 is not an enforcement action. It's the opposite. TRPA attempting to paper over egregious violations and dismiss them with a wink to their partner, the LTVA. When I learned belatedly that General Criminal Marshal was the contract staff behind this, it all made sense to me. The first additional point I wish to make for the record is that under the requirements of the bi-state compact, staff is acting entirely beyond authority in approving the proposed motions before the legal committee, according to unrebutted facts which stand as truth in my lawsuit Miller versus TRPA. I will be highly aggrieved if the legal committee acts to approve any motions in this manner as a so-called final action, which action is reserved solely to the governing board under law. Mr. Marshall knows better than to entertain speculation, which is what the staff report compliance assessments are. Due to the lack of monitoring, there is no substantial evidence of compliance with vehicle miles traveled or level of service for traffic, and plenty of evidence of non-compliance with monitoring and other permit conditions. Stop violating the law and abusing your discretion under the illegal regulations you have adopted. Thank you.
One more hand went up. Only a first name on Zoom. Lou, if you could state your full name for the record and unmute to make your comment.
Lou Feldman, I'm sorry. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the governing board. We will have a more in-depth conversation, of course, with the legal committee, but I think it's important to understand that there has been over $150,000 spent on monitoring to date. That monitoring has demonstrated there have been no LOS impacts, there have been no adverse parking consequences, there have been no neighborhood impacts, and that out of the 60 or so special conditions of approval, TDVA has complied with all of them, with the possible exception of the type of electronic sensors that are utilized to count actual cars in the casino core. So I appreciate the opportunity to perhaps correct some of the misstatements in the record and look forward to a more in-depth conversation with the legal committee. Best wishes to all of you for a healthy, happy New Year and Merry Christmas. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other hands raised?
No, there are no more hands raised to comment.
Okay, Mr. Bass?
Well, if Mr. Feldman's still online, I'm just not on the legal committee, and I just have a question around what's being proposed around the gate data, which I think is actually something that's great, but does that go backwards so that we have data for the year from those casino parking gates so that we actually will have monitoring for the entire year if we do approve that moving forward?
Yes.
Yes, it goes back.
Great, thank you.
All right, and I don't see any other public comment. So I will look for a motion to adjourn. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, we're adjourned at 1:52 and